Hello and welcome to this video. In today's video I'm going to show you how you can use little bits and pieces from around the house, put them all together and create a beautiful succulent jar that you can hang or sit in your house and enjoy for years to come. Let's get started. In today's project, everything that you use should be something that you can just find around your house or can get pretty easily. The first two most important things is your succulent and your jar. So for my jars today, they're just recycled food jars. I've taken the labels off. You'll notice if you're trying to do this and the labels are a little bit tricky coming off, something like isopropyl alcohol can rub it off. If you don't have that, just a bit of elbow grease, soap and water will also work. You'll be able to get the labels off and be left with a jar for free. The next thing is the succulents. I have a succulent garden, so I just went and picked two succulents out of the garden. These two here, cute little thing, and a bit of a bigger thing for the bigger jar. Now this one has roots, but if you have an existing succulent plant and you just want to pick a bit of the plant off, you can totally do that. Just make sure you do it about a day before. If you don't let it rest, the succulent's wound won't heal, and then what happens is the succulent can kind of get full of water and die.
Hello darkness, my old friend.
Okay, the next bits and pieces I have are, I've got cacti soil. You can use any soil pretty much, succulents are very hardy. I've got soil in a bag, you can dig it out of the ground, whatever works. I've also got this perlite, not required, but what I'm going to do with that is sit it on top of the rocks so that the soil doesn't sink through the rocks. It's not a big deal, it's just an aesthetic thing. Warning, if you are using perlite, please use protective gear. The next thing is the rocks, so I've picked white rocks. You can get them from a hardware shop. Rocks are good because it helps with the drainage, so they're good to put towards the bottom of the jar, and then I also like to put them at the top of the jar so that you don't get any bugs and things living in the soil, because you want to have these in your house. Here it's not humus, it's actually sand. Just picked up some sand from my shed. I've got a whole lot of sand in there. Some string. We're just going to use the string on the small jar only, but I'll show you how we can make it a hanging succulent jar. And last but not least, I've got food dye, mega optional, but what I want to do is dye a little bit of the sand. So we're going to have a little bit of red sand. If you want blue sand or green sand, you can go get food dye, totally optional. The very first thing I want to do is dye the sand because you actually want this to dry first. So yeah, let's dye the sand. To dye the sand, I poured out as much sand as I thought I'd need. And then once I was happy with that amount, made a little well in the center and poured in the food colouring. Next, all I had to do was mix and mix and mix and mix, and then I spread it out nice and flat, ready to dry in the sun.
Sun dry.
Now that that is dry, I'm going to set it aside, and what we'll work on now is turning the small jar into a hanging jar. So to do this little section, we're just going to need some string and some scissors and the ability to tie some knots. First I measured out how tall I wanted the string to be and folded that string in half and then cut it, and we'll need 4 pieces of string this tall. So this length I did was actually quite a short amount of string at the top. You can totally do any length you want. You could do a lot of extra string if you're not sure how long you want it to be, but here are the 4 pieces of string I've cut. The next thing is when they're folded in half, just to tie a very nice little knot in the end to tie them all together. Taking the upside down jar, I put this string on top of the jar and made it so the knot sat in the middle and that each string was paired with another string so that it neatly sat around in a circle. Now these pairs are going to be the knots. So you move down a few centimeters and tie your first knot, and then go around, and for each pair of strings At about the same length down, you want to tie a knot until you have 4 knots ready to go. Next, we make it into a net by taking one from each of the pairs and tying them together. So you'll notice I picked the strings that just sat nicely next to each other, went down a few centimeters and then tied a knot, and then repeated the same thing all around until I had 4 knots in total in this row. Again, I sat it over the jar to see what it would look like, and then found one string from each pair that sat next to each other, went down a few centimeters again and tied a knot again. And the same thing as before, we want to do this 4 times, so there's 4 knots in this row. Now I fit it onto the jar and it looks good. This is how I want it to be. So it's time to tie the top knot. So what I did is flipped it upside down, took all those raw edges and just tied them together. Now I take the jar and I put it inside and we can see that it's looking great. Now at this stage you could finish, but I think it's a little bit flimsy and that the jar could maybe slip out. So what I like to do is take another length of string, tie it in a double knot around the top, and then take that same string, loop it around a few times, and then tie it together. The last thing to do is snip off the extra string and we've got a hanging jar. The next thing we want to do is to put the sand and the soil and the stones into our jars. What I'll do is add more layers in the larger jar and less in the smaller jar. When you're doing it yourself, you can just play around. This is where you get to have fun, be creative, and make something that you're happy with. So let's go. I decide to go with red sand as the bottom layer. So I put this in the bottom, and to make sure it's sitting flat, I'll give the jar a little shake. Next we go with the white rocks. So I pour a few of those in, and on top of them will sit some perlite and flatten that down just with my finger. Next we'll put in the soil, and you can see we're getting close to the top, so it's time for the succulent. I put a little bit more soil around the edge of the succulent and then make sure to push it down so it's nice and secure. And finally, I'll put in a layer of white rocks and push them down, and then this jar is complete. For the big jar, I start with a layer of white rocks, followed by a layer of perlite, and then regular sand, spinning as I go to make sure that the sand goes in as flat as possible. Next, I'll do a layer of the red sand, and I use my spoon in this one to flatten out the top again. Then we've got a layer of rocks, followed by a layer of perlite, and then we're going to follow that with a layer of dirt. You can see the dirt is only about halfway up at this point, so I decide to put some sand and then some more dirt, and this dirt's actually where the succulent's going to go. Finally, I put the succulent in with some more dirt and poke it all down so it's nice and secure, and then finish it all off with the final layer of rocks at the very top, and we are done. A couple of sprays of water and your succulents are ready to go. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I've got a bit of cleaning to do. In the meantime, if you liked this video, please give it a big thumbs up like. Please subscribe to this channel if you'd like to watch more content like this. And if you've got an idea of a video you'd like to see me do, please chuck it in the comments. I'll read it and hey, you might be lucky and maybe I'll do it. So until next time, see ya.